Hello, everyone, and welcome to another webisode of All Politics Are Local, the first one for 2021, and it's a big one. As always, I'm John Dowding, WSAV Now correspondent, and we're being joined by WSAV Washington correspondent Kelly Meyer in Washington, D.C. Hey, Kelly, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, John. Thank you for having me and Happy New Year.
Right? We finally got through 2020. Happy New Year, Kelly. I cannot tell you how happy I am that last year ended. I think I woke up on New Year's Day. Granted, I had to work, but I woke up on New Year's Day being like, oh my God, this is over. It's finally over.
No, but the crazy seems to be carrying into 2021 already. We have a huge week ahead.
Yes, we do. You have a huge week at you. We're working yesterday on the Hill during the different swearing in of members who in the House and in the Senate. Today is just the preparations for the Georgia Senate runoff race. All eyes in the nation are watching this race, which is tomorrow. I got a text saying my absentee ballot was accepted and counted, so that one's in. Hopefully other people are going to do the same, where they're going out tomorrow to vote. And then on Wednesday, Congress is going to officially certify the election results, even though there are some challenges, but we will get through all of this. But first off, let's start off on that last thing I was just talking about. So there have been some challenges. We're hearing from different Republican lawmakers in Congress. We're hearing from some House members, as well as now a handful of senators, including Josh Hawley from Missouri. He was the first one to really push for that initial push of fighting back against the certification. So Kelly, tell us a little bit about this. Does it really? I think the question that everybody just has is this going to overturn the election? Will this overturn the election results?
And the answer is no. What happens at the end of the day on Wednesday is the result will remain the same. We will still have Biden and Harris as the president and vice president. They will be inaugurated on January 20th. This is just one of those last ditch efforts, another last ditch effort on behalf of Trump loyalists to try to show their support for the president. But I did a story on this right before the holidays, anticipating that this was going to be a big story this week. And what will happen is you have one member from the Senate, one member from the House. That's all you need at least. But right now they do have more to object. They will break. They will consider this, and they say they will reject the ballots that were sent to them from the Electoral College. But with Democrats in the majority in the House and with a lot of Republicans in the Senate that aren't going to side with these other members of the GOP that are in the Senate that are pushing this, like you mentioned, Senator Josh Hawley and others. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell has already recognized Biden as the president. He is encouraging his caucus not to challenge this, to let it go and move forward. But we've gotten alerts here in Washington from the mayor here to be safe and be alert and not engage with protests that may be happening here on Tuesday and Wednesday. We may be expecting some crowds, some demonstrations, things like that happening throughout the week. And then the question comes after this, what's the next move? I'm wondering, what will the president say after Wednesday? And that's what you heard from 10 former secretaries of defense, encouraging him and urging him not to use any kind of military force to overturn the election.
Yeah, and I think to honestly, what I've just been paying attention to be completely honest, with all of these challenges, is really just trying to get a feel for what the Republican Party is going to look like after President Trump leaves the White House. I think that's on the minds of a lot of people like you and I, who are seeing this party that reshaped itself into the vision of this president. And now this president is doing things to undermine the same party that he built up. You saw when they had the bipartisan COVID bill that Mitch McConnell and his Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin worked on. He came out and said it was a horrible deal, and he wanted different things that Democrats were supporting. And then and again, we'll talk about this, the phone call he had with Georgia Secretary of State, who's a Republican, urging him to do some things. Again, we'll talk about that. So I think it's just really interesting to see this handful of lawmakers who are coming together, and especially with some who are in talks of possibly running in 2024, obviously. I think it's just interesting to see how the party dynamic is shaping up. But thank you for that recap, Kelly. I have so much to talk about, so let's move on now to, again, what we were talking about starting off, the big race going on tomorrow, right here in the Peach State, where all the action is happening. We have the Georgia Senate runoff races, which are going to determine the balance of power in the United States Senate. So we have a race between incumbent Senator David Perdue, who is looking to go into his second term, and he is facing Democratic challenger John Ossoff. And we have incumbent Senator Kelly Loeffler, who was appointed a year ago into the role, and now she is running to maintain that seat. She's running against Reverend Raphael Warnock, who's also a Savannah native. So Kelly, I mean, over the weekend, Kamala Harris was in Savannah. We've had Joe Biden here in Savannah. We've had Joe Biden's coming to Georgia today. Donald Trump's coming to Georgia. I believe Mike Pence is coming to Georgia. We've had a like last minute blitz of huge politicians coming to Georgia for this race. Kelly, talk about how people are feeling about it in DC. This race has become nationalized. What are people saying? Why are they just paying so much attention and paying so much money into this, putting so much money, I should say, into these races?
Yeah, like you said, you guys are watching it there, but we are watching it up here, especially in Washington, D.C. As you mentioned, members of Congress were sworn in yesterday. I was covering the senators getting sworn in, and it's interesting to know that as they got sworn in, we don't know who's going to control the Senate. As they were being sworn in there, we don't know if it's going to be Democrats or Republicans in the majority, and everybody has that on their mind. As everybody says, Georgia's on their mind. It's on everybody's mind, as you mentioned, President Trump as well, who's heading there today. Vice President-elect Joe Biden, or President-elect Joe Biden, Vice President-elect Kamala Harris was there last night. This really will decide what happens up here in Washington, because who controls the Senate can control what kind of legislation goes through, what kind of relationship is had with the White House down the road. So there's a lot of focus. I mean, I know we're talking about what happens Wednesday, but I know everybody's looking at what happens Tuesday. We know the Senate actually adjourned yesterday and they won't be back until Wednesday. I'm sure there's many people going down to help them campaign. It's huge. I mean, you can't even emphasize enough how big of a deal what happens tomorrow is and how much it can change the course of the country and the course of what happens here in Congress for years to come.
And I think that's really the pivotal thing. I mean, again, I think the average everyday voter is not going to the polls saying, I'm voting to maintain power in the Senate for my party. I don't really think that's what a lot of things are on voters' minds. I've been speaking to some voters over the last few weeks, and the same ideals, the same issues that brought them to the polls in massive amounts across the country and here in the Peach State are on their minds here too. The healthcare, obviously, pandemic response, the economy, economic assistance for the pandemic. I spoke with Reverend Raphael Warnock and who he's running against, I should say, Senator Kelly Loeffler, over the last few weeks. Here are two things they had to say about their state in the race and why they should be the next senator of Georgia.
In the middle of a pandemic, politicians like Kelly Loeffler are waging war against the voices of the people of Georgia who have spoken clearly. These votes have been counted 3 times. And while she's playing political games, people are still waiting on relief from COVID-19. And I think it's unfortunate, and it underscores the ways in which she is clearly out of touch.
This is about holding the Secretary of State accountable. That's why David Perdue and I called for the Secretary of State to step down. Look, I came out of the private sector. You are held accountable for your results in the private sector. We have to hold our elections officials accountable for making sure that Georgians trust this election process.
Again, you just heard from two of the people you'll see on the ballot tomorrow, Reverend Raphael Warnock and Senator Kelly Loeffler. So Kelly, again, huge race. It really is. There's so much hanging in the balance because of this race. The first 100 days of the Biden administration, what they're going to be able to get done, the balance of power in Congress in the next 2 years. And again, that's just, again, a lot is going to be at stake. We'll keep our eyes on that, but we have to touch on a huge story that broke over the weekend of this phone call between the Georgia Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, and President Trump. Obviously, President Trump has been a huge critic of elections here in Georgia since he lost the state. And again, Georgia flipped for the first time in almost 20 years in this election in 2020. And so now we're hearing an hour-long phone conversation with different members of the Trump administration, his chief of staff, Mark Meadows, as well as the president, urging the Georgia Secretary of State and his workers, his staff, I should say, to quote find the votes to flip Georgia back to red. Kelly, we again, this is the big story of today. It was big when it broke over the weekend, but it's still going on now. I saw a CNN alert and other alerts from other media outlets floating the words abuse of power. Kelly, what implications does this have for this outgoing president who literally will leave office in 16 days?
And I think that's the question you're going to be hearing a lot on Capitol Hill. That's going to be asked of lawmakers as we meet them there on Capitol Hill as they come into session. What's next? Not only are some of the lawmakers already criticizing this call for just going against what the country believes in, but also, is this potentially a deeper offense of what he asked? Is this, like you mentioned, an abuse of power? Is that something that's going to be investigated? All of these are good questions. All of these are things we don't know just yet as it's developing. But as this call makes its rounds and people are listening to it, they hear that what he's asking of the Georgia Secretary of State could potentially bring up other charges potentially, and also just the fact that they've counted these votes 3 times: initial count, the audit, the recount, all finding that President-elect Joe Biden won in Georgia. So as the Georgia Secretary of State said there's really nothing that they found that can change that. And he stood up to the president in that call and said, the data we have here is not the same thing that you're seeing. And push back against him. So I'm also curious to see what more the president says in that speech tonight that's happening in Georgia in regards to this, because we haven't quite heard too much after the call was released from him on Twitter. So I'm curious to see what he has to say and what happens next, as you mentioned, in terms of abuse of power allegations.
And I think another important point, you raise a number of great points. And just adding to that, I think something else that needs to be recognized is the state of the election and the results do not weigh on Georgia. Say, and this is complete speculation, hypotheticals, we find a warehouse of 12,000 votes that were all in favor of President Trump, and that flips Georgia. He still lost the election. And so I'm really just thinking, and Kelly, you can add obviously and comment to this if you want. I think the whole motivation behind all of this seems more personal than political, but also the political aspect now is really just coming with these Senate races. I think that it freaked out the president. I think it freaked out members of his party, obviously when Georgia flipped blue this year. But I think fighting against the man who's in charge of the elections in the state when there's an election going on tomorrow, it's just a lot of mixed messaging for their base here. I think I think it could confuse some of the voters, whether or not they trust the system.
Yeah, and I'm really curious to see if the pushback from President Trump and other Republicans on the election in Georgia really does have an impact tomorrow when we hear the results. I'm very curious to see if that affected Republicans trusting the system and going out to vote in this runoff, or if it didn't. And that'll be very interesting to see as the results start to come in tomorrow night.
And Kelly and I were even talking before we started this. I was gonna say podcast because it basically is, I'll just call it that. Before we started the show, there we go. Today, talking about whether we'll find out today, not today, whether we'll find out the results tomorrow night or a couple days later.
Right.
I believe that we should know more by tomorrow night. The text I got from Chatham County Board of Elections said that my vote's been counted. So maybe they're counting early. So we don't know. Just stay tuned with us here at WSAV, your local election headquarters. We'll obviously keep you updated as we learn the results and really pay attention to this really pivotal election. But Kelly, thank you for starting the new year with us. Thanks for being here with us to break down so much going on in Washington. We're definitely going to have a lot to talk about next week. I can already tell.
Absolutely. And I look forward to it, John. Thank you for having me as always.
Of course, hang in there this week.
Thank you.
As always, you can see more of Kelly's stories on our website. Just go to wsav.com/Washington, and you can catch up on previous episodes from last year of All Politics Are Local. Just go to our website at wsav.com/allpoliticsarelocal. Thank you so much again for watching. I'm John Dowding. We'll see you again next week on All Politics Are Local.